Hello, I'm Cassidy Jo Fortin with Titan Communications, reporting from the 3rd Annual Sustainability Symposium at the Titan Student Union Pavilions. We have important panelists and experts with the latest information on environmental policy and encouraging sustainability in the environment both now and in the future. Let's see what they have to say.
All right, well, welcome to the 3rd Annual Sustainability Symposium here at Cal State Fullerton. My name is John Carroll. I'm a faculty member in the Geography Department during the day. I also spend some of my time as the Interim Director for Academic Technology. But tonight, I am delighted to introduce myself as the moderator for the session here. I hope you all are relaxed and comfortable because we have a very interesting panel of speakers in store for you tonight. The theme of this year's symposium is social justice in sustainability. And if you've had a look at the program and the backgrounds of the speakers that'll be presenting to us tonight, you might be wondering why a guy from a brewery and a guy from a USC and then another guy who's running a UC campus's environmental stuff, what that would have to do with sustainability and certainly within the social justice realm. Well, one of the things that we've noticed over time, and I don't want to spoiler for anybody at the end, but certain neighborhoods, certain communities, certain groups have been on the receiving end of environmental injustice for a long time. And corporations, government agencies, and individuals are now being held accountable for what they do to the environment. And so when you have a company like Stone Brewing coming here to talk about their responsibility, it's because whether they like it or not, and I think they probably have a nice social conscience, they don't want to do this sort of thing, but whether they like it or not, they're being asked not to create any adverse impacts on the environment, and certainly not to target those impacts towards individuals, either on purpose or accidentally. So while these talks might seem like they're going at a little bit of angles, try to think of it in the context of we're all part of one big, happy global system, and maybe not so happy all the time, and that's why we have some of these challenges. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker tonight. Our first speaker is Tim Sudam. He's the Water Operations Senior Manager for Stone Brewing Company. Tim's only been on the job for a short time, so he'll talk about some of the excitement of getting on board at a new job, but he's no stranger to the water world. He's responsible for all the water treatment and brewing waste treatment and recycling and disposal for Stone Brewing. So think about that. Right? I mean, most of us just think of the end product of that delicious ice-cold IPA that we might be enjoying, but what went into creating that, and then what waste had to be managed other than just dumping it out into the Escondido hinterland down there in San Diego County. Prior to that, though, he spent 14 years with the San Diego County Water Authority, so he's been in charge of a lot of water over his career. Prior to that, he spent 10 years in wastewater remediation site consulting, and so he's seen almost every facet of managing water once we're done with it. Tim is also a licensed chemical and civil engineer, so he's got a lot of experience and background, and without further ado, Tim.
Good evening, everybody. I have some extremely bad news. I was unable to bring any beer tonight. I'm sorry. Apologize for that. A little bit of background on Stone. We have 9 year-round beers. We have 5 annual releases. We also have 4 to 5 collaboration brews, usually a year. That's with other breweries, other craft breweries. We have over 800 employees. We deliver to 41 states, and I'll get to that a little bit. We're expanding significantly over in Europe, and I'll get to that in just a bit. And we're the fastest growing craft brewery in the United States for the last 17 years. Currently, we're 10th in the United States, and we've been at number 10 for at least the past 3 or 4 years. So mostly I'm going to talk about tonight is the Stone Brewery in Escondido, and it's basically designed and will ultimately reach 450,000 barrels a year. And KBBL stands for 1,000 barrels. I was in the water industry. Now I'm having to deal with totally new units. Now I'm dealing with barrels. I was dealing with acre feet before, 1 million gallons. So here's another one to throw at you. And roughly that's 14 million gallons of beer a year. We're roughly producing about 300,000 barrels a year right now, and we're expanding like crazy in Escondido. We're also opening a new brewery in Richmond this time next year. We're expanding in Richmond, Virginia. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, but that's going to be on the order of 800,000 barrels a year. And then we're also, at the same time, we're expanding in Escondido, we're opening a brewery in Richmond, and at the same time, we're opening a brewery in Berlin. All this is going on right now, so Tom and I have been extremely busy. But that's going to be fairly much smaller. It's going to be about 50,000 barrels a year, and that's about 1.5 million gallons of beer. So I chose this term for sustainability. I liked it. It actually came from one of the magazines that I read, Chemical Engineering Magazine. I'm a chemical engineer. It's a path of continuous improvement wherein the products and services are delivered for less impact on the earth, progressively less impact on the earth. And I think that's what Stone is trying to do. I think we are probably one of the most sustainable craft breweries in the industry at this point in time, and hopefully you'll agree with me after I get done tonight. So the brewing resources, water, biggest resource, energy, and then hops and barley. And as I mentioned, I'm going to focus on the water environment. I'll talk a little bit about electricity and what we've done in those respects, some what we do with the spent grains, and to try and reuse those. And then I already talked about electricity. We're also putting in some electricity, renewable electricity as well. So the water environment, basically we take grains and hops, we use city water, we mix them together, we apply a lot of energy, boil them, we create our beer. All the waste goes to the drain and comes to a wastewater facility that Tom and I operate. We're in charge of operating. We clean that water up, we recycle it, and we reuse it in the facility. We also have the spent grains, spent yeast, that we also are trying to recycle to the extent possible to try and be as sustainable as we possibly can. So what are the drivers for being sustainable? One is regulatory, stress on our water supplies. I mean, everybody here, I'm sure, is very aware of the drought, what's going on, the new mandate from the governor. I'll talk a little bit about that. But water demand in the U.S. has tripled in the last 50 years, significantly, and it's only getting worse. And pollution. So what happens with waste after we generate it? What do we do with it? It's a lot worse, and we've got to treat it to put it back in the environment that we took it from. Right now, also, driver is savings incentive program. One of our largest water suppliers, Metropolitan Water District, they're a wholesale supplier. They provide savings incentive programs for water recycling programs. So we're applying for, and we're going to receive about $70,000 in incentives from Metropolitan for recycling our water. And then image. Stone wants to portray this image. We very much want to be a sustainable organization. Right now, our supplies are in extreme drought situation. The governor just mandated 25% cutbacks. Interestingly enough, in San Diego, almost all the municipal agencies were already under mandatory cutbacks up to the level of 20%. So the governor's is only increasing us 5%. And my understanding is that all the local agencies are going to go up to 30%. That's stage 3 in the local agencies in San Diego County. So we don't see right now a huge impact, but Stone is doubling its efforts to conserve water. We may actually implement capital improvements to recycle more water so that we use less water from the agency so that we can accommodate the drought situation should we be impacted. So water use. Extremely heavy load of water is used to generate beer. Typically, most beers use about 7 volumes of water to generate 1 volume of beer. So that's a lot. Stone, right now we're about 4 to 1, and that's because we recycle. Best in the industry is about 3 to 1, and that's where we're striving to get to. We're trying to get to 3 to 1. It protects your resources. It lowers the water usage and aids in community growth. And if the community grows, then we might be able to sell more beer. And that's what we want. And then it can reduce energy use. It takes a lot of energy to get the water to San Diego County, and I'll touch on that a little bit as well. So our water supplies, they come from the State Water Project and the Colorado River. And it takes a ton of energy to get that water down to us. Over 80%, that used to be 95% 20 years ago, come from those two sources. It's now 80% because the Water Authority in San Diego County has done a great job in diversifying its supplies. We've got a desalination project. We've procured supplies from Imperial Irrigation District from the Colorado River for conservation measurements, etc. So they've done a good job in diversifying the water supplies in San Diego County, and that's helping businesses out. However, the water supply and the quality of that water supply has impacted Stone's ability and costs and water use to be able to make the beer. So our supply, as I mentioned, it can either be 100% state project water, Colorado River water, or any mix in between. And the state project water has less hardness and alkalinity, and it's perfect for the brewing process. It's exactly what we need. We wouldn't have to treat it at all if we got 100% state project water. Unfortunately, Colorado River water is very high hardness. It requires treatment. And as a result of the drought and the Water Authority procuring the supplies from the IAD, et cetera, we get 100% Colorado River water at this time. And that's not always the case, but the state, because of the drought, the state project water is being supplied less to San Diego County at this time. But what does that mean to Stone? It means that we have to treat that water a lot more. We have to treat all of the incoming water with reverse osmosis. And reverse osmosis takes out all the minerals that we need. We have to blend some of that water back in because the brewers have specific water quality requirements for alkalinity and hardness that they want in their brews. But about 30% of the water that we treat, we have to waste down the drain. It's where all the salt goes. So right now we just hired an engineer to evaluate using our waste brine, is higher in salt, for cooling towers. So instead of wasting it, we can treat this. We soften it, we soften the we soften the brine, and we put sodium chloride back in, take out the hardness, and use that water in cooling towers. And it's a new concept. So we take this water up and we concentrate it in the cooling towers 50 times. And we use a ton less water, and it uses less chemicals because you don't have to put in corrosion control chemicals and biocide when you operate at the higher TDS. It operates between salinity levels of ocean water, 1 to 2 times ocean water. So we're looking at evaluating this and putting this in all of our cooling towers in the near future. So now I'll talk a little bit. That was our upfront water treatment and what we're trying to do to make the most efficient use of water with that system. Now I'll talk about all the wastewater that comes to us and what we do with it. So the potable use in all of the brewery and the packaging hall is about 100 to 150,000 gallons per day. And what Tom and I see in the wastewater facility is about, on average, 80,000 gallons per day. We can reclaim and reuse right now with our system, we're expanding its capacity, between 15 and 40,000 gallons per day. So we can get up to 40% of our use as reclaimed water in the brewery. And I just want to reiterate this. We do not put any of this water into the beer. It's process only. Also, I'm going to say that. It's process only. So we use it for chemical cleans. That's clean in place. We use it for wash downs. We use it for packaging. And right now we use it for our cooling towers and our boilers. So I was going to go technically a little bit through our process, what we do. I understand that there might be some engineers here. So if I start using acronyms or anything, just throw something at me. I'll try and not do that. But when the wastewater comes to us, it comes in a sump. We collect it. We send it through a rotary drum screen out as much of the leftover spent grains, bottle caps, broken glass, that kind of stuff. We equalize it. We send it to a big tank. And then we use activated sludge. That's the aeration tank. And activated sludge is a process that's used at normal municipal wastewater treatment plants. Bacteria eat your high-strength waste, your beer or spent grain stuff that's in the water. And then we filter it out using a membrane bioreactor. So this is membranes, PVDF membranes, filters down to 0.04 microns. We add some acid. We run that through reverse osmosis, and that removes everything. It removes all the impurities left over, including the salt. Then We add some base, we add some more salt back to it, and I'll discuss a little bit more about that, and we send it back into the facility, as I mentioned, to be used only for processed water, not in the brewing process. We also have the solids that we have to deal with. So the solids are the bacteria that are eating the food in the AT. And we have to remove those every single day because they're continuing to grow and they're a living organism. So we have to remove those every day. And we use a centrifuge. We add some coagulant, some polymer. We centrifuge them out. And then we put them in bins, and the local waste company comes and picks them up, and they reuse them as soil amendments. This is an overall schematic of the facility and the sizing criteria that we have. As I mentioned, sump, right here, sump, goes to the rotary screen, EQ tank, then our aeration tanks where the bugs are. This is a very energy intensive process. It's called aerobic digestion. There's another slightly more efficient, energy efficient, probably sustainable process that's called anaerobic digestion that we could use, but that was not chosen as the alternative that was used at Stone. And the byproduct of anaerobic digestion is methane gas. You can use the methane gas to generate electricity and reuse that electricity in the facility. So had we had this to do all over again, we might be using the anaerobic digestion process. We use blowers. We have to supply, and it's very energy intensive. The reason I say that is the blower, we have to add a lot of air for these bugs to eat all that food. Our MBRs create our ultrafiltered water. We put that in a tank. We use that ultrafiltered water, add some acid to it through our reverse osmosis units. Our byproduct from the reverse osmosis process goes to a brine tank, and then we have a connection to an ocean outfall that allows it to go directly to the ocean. Our permeate from the RO system goes to our reclaimed water tank, and as I mentioned, we reuse it in the Some pictures of what it looks like. I was in the municipal industry before I came here, and I'd like to preface this that on the private side, it does not look nearly as pretty as the municipal side does. So this is the rotary drum screen. These are the leftover grains that are coming out of the rotary drum screen, and then that water goes to the EQ tank. We just installed a new 40,000 gallon EQ tank. Then this is our activated sludge process. These are where all the bugs are, and this membrane is inside these tanks. And this is the membranes that pull out good water, microfiltered water, 7.04 microns, that feeds our RO system that generates the reclaimed water. So, one thing about RO water, it has no salt in it at all. It's extremely corrosive to metal pipes. So it wants to suck all the metal right out of the pipes. So you have to do what's called stabilization. You want to add salt back into it, and you want to adjust the pH high. And it is called the positive Langmuir saturation index, and it's so it aggressively corrode those pipes. We've had copper pipes in the facility get pinhole leaks because of disinfect it with chlorine for microbial control as we use it throughout the facility, and we stabilize it for corrosion control, as I mentioned earlier. So just a comparison of the costs and the lengths that Stone is going to remain sustainable, potable versus reuse, and I call it H2O squared because it's potable costs. We get potable water from our local supplier for about ½ cent a gallon. It costs us about 8 cents a gallon to generate this reclaimed water. That is only operational costs. That's chemicals, electricity, filter media, lab testing. It doesn't include the capital costs that we've invested that I just showed you. As I mentioned earlier, even though it costs us that much more, there's the likelihood that we're going to have mandatory cutbacks if the drought gets worse. So we're looking at potentially more capital improvements, more operating, in order to generate more reclaimed water and reduce our water volume, our water use to beer ratio. On the solid side, as I mentioned, activated sludge, we centrifuge it. This is what it looks like right here. These are what the bugs are, the leftover solids. So on our solid waste side, what are our drivers? Regulatory, AB 341 required commercial recycling back in 2012, I believe it was, in order to reduce landfill disposal. Economics can be a cost savings. And brand, again, brand and image. That's the brand and image that Stone wants, where Stone wants. So what we do, we maximize the recycling of all of our packaging. Pallets, cardboard boxes, plastic to the extent possible. We have loads of bins that are taken away every day for recycling. And then we also maximize our brewing byproduct reuse. Our spent grains, what's called our lauter ton drip. This is right after the boil. The lauter ton drip is an extremely high strength waste. And spent yeast, that's what ferments the wort into beer. I guess I do know something. So the spent grain reuse, we put it into silos, we load it into the back of trucks, and it's taken away by a supplier who actually uses it as a supplement for livestock feed. And in the very near future, we are investing right now about $500,000 to start dewatering our lauter ton drip and our spent yeast, and we'll add the solids portion of those to the livestock feed supplement, and we get about $20 a ton for that stuff. Now the liquid side is a high-strength waste that can be used in wastewater treatment plants for the denitrification process. And in some municipalities, the receiving waters and the waters that are treated at wastewater treatment plants have nitrates and nitrites. And they use methanol in order to denitrify, in a process to denitrify those nitrites and nitrates to nitrogen. So they have effluent requirements. So if they can get this lauter ton drip liquid from us at a cheaper price than the methanol, then that would be a beneficial use for them, as well as a beneficial use for us, because now we don't have to pay to get rid of that liquid portion of the lauter ton drip. What are we doing what are the drivers for energy? I think everybody probably knows what the drivers are: climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. There's a ton of incentives for renewable energy. And I think it's becoming less expensive. I think solar panels are probably getting to the point where you can produce electricity for less than you can get it for, it's SCE here, it's SDG&E in San Diego. So what has Stone done? We've put in panels, almost 3,000 panels on our packaging facility as well as the brewery, and we generate almost 40% of our power. And that's enough to offset about 1.5 million pounds of carbon dioxide. And it's equivalent to removing about 150 vehicles from the road. So we actually, this is my last slide, and this is what's happening in Stone, in Stone Richmond. We had a great public-private partnering relationship with the city of Richmond. They actually gave us 2 million gallons per day capacity in their wastewater treatment plant. And they want our high-strength waste because their wastewater treatment plant dumps into the St. James River, and they have to go through denitrification because they have nitrates and nitrite effluent limitations. So they're going to take our lauter ton drip, and they're going to pay us for it to use in the denitrification process. And they are also waiving our wastewater surcharges for our high strength waste because it helps them also denitrify in their wastewater treatment plant. It's an excellent example of a public-private partnership and becoming sustainable for both entities. And that's all I have.
So we're going to hold all the questions till the end, and we'll have a panel discussion, because I want to find out, do those cows get drunk eating that waste? So we'll find out later on. But without further ado, our next speaker is Wendell Brazzi. He works for the University of California, Irvine, one of our fellow Orange County campuses right here. He's currently the Administrative and Business Services Vice Chancellor, so he's way up in the administration, making a lot of big decisions. And he also is participating in the University of California President Janet Napolitano's Global Climate Leadership Council. He's the co-chair of that. So we're talking about a system-wide initiative to deal with global climate change here. So he also co-chairs that. He's on the Leadership Council of the Climate Committee. The campus, UC Irvine campus, received California's highest environmental award, the Governor's Environmental and Economic Leadership Award, in 2008 and again in 2013. And you've been in your capacity during both of those. Is that true? Yes. All right. The campus has also been on Sierra Magazine's top 10 list of greenest campuses for the past 5 years. They have 21 LEED platinum and gold buildings. And if you were here earlier and heard Megan's talk about what that means, then you should be mighty impressed with that number right there. So Wendell, come on up and tell us what you want.
Thank you. So I do play two roles. My day job is the UC Irvine Vice Chancellor's job, but I spend roughly 35% of my time in University of California system-wide climate solutions activities, and so most of what I'm going to talk about today will be about UC as a system and what we're doing in the UC system around sustainability and carbon abatement. And I'll give some examples from UC Irvine. I hope I don't confuse you by bouncing back and forth. This slide shows sort of the path that University of California has taken as it has become increasingly aware of and committed to sustainability and carbon neutrality. So it started out back here, 2003, 2004, and when we look back now at the policies and goals that were set in 2003 and 4, they look pretty timid, actually. The goal when we first started talking about a green building policy in UC was to build LEED, silver, or equivalent. Equivalent actually meant some campuses didn't even go through the LEED process. There was an internal checklist that was kind of equivalent to silver. It wasn't really quite as rigorous, to be honest with you. And the goal in terms of energy efficiency back then was to, and there was a big debate about this. I remember the debate because facilities people would say, well, we're already building some LEED silver buildings and we've been doing energy efficiency at that point for maybe a decade. And so people said, maybe we can get another 10% savings out of energy efficiency. And that was actually the number that went in to the initial policy passed by the regents. It was that we would cut our carbon footprint 10% through energy efficiency. Now, I'm going to come back to this point a lot because we were so wrong. We had no idea how far wrong we were about the potential of energy efficiency to make the biggest dent so far on our carbon footprint. I'll give you some examples in a few minutes. In 2007, the UC system as a whole, all the chancellors rather, I confuse our systems sometimes, yeah, all the chancellors of all the 10 campuses agreed as a group to sign the ACU-PCC, the American College and University President's Climate Commitment. And when UC did that, it actually had kind of a big impact nationally because a whole system was coming in at one time. Up until that point, it was mostly smaller liberal arts private colleges, a few state institutions, mostly back east. So this suddenly shifted the emphasis to the West Coast, and it was around that time too that I think that the group that is I think roughly comprising the 7 or 8 or maybe it's 9 CSU campuses that joined the ACU PCC also became signatories right around that, or within a year or so. Yeah, and so this was a turning point. And this was mostly about carbon neutrality. The main part of that commitment is to become carbon neutral. The wording at the time was as soon as possible. That was literally the wording in the commitment that everybody signed. And different people had different interpretations about what that meant. I actually, someone in my office who works on our sustainability, sort of works on the Sierra Club and Princeton stuff, she actually read all the, and I read quite a few of these initial 100 climate action plans. And that was one of the conditions of joining this. You had to produce for your campus a climate action plan. So we actually went through all 100 of the initial 100 signatories. And I caused quite a stink at the national level when I announced at a national meeting that of the first 100, 60% of them didn't list a date at all for carbon neutrality. The mean date that was listed by the ones who actually did list a date was 2050. Well, I sort of thought that was inconsistent with the words "as soon as possible," but then I'd already stuck my foot halfway in my mouth. So we had to be part of the aggressive part of this movement that would pick a more aggressive date, and so that was probably a good thing that I backed myself into that corner, because now, and actually, this is kind of an interesting story. My boss at the time, who was part of this vote of the chancellors who signed this, was Michael Drake, and I advised him not to sign it. I said, I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't think you should sign it because we don't know the path to zero. And of course, he went off, and the chancellors all voted for it and signed it, and came back and told me. And he said, and by the way, you're in charge of that now. And so the fact that the University of California and this campus as well is one of the signatories, along with some of your other distinguished campuses in the Cal State system, the fact that people were willing to sign this thing at a time that there wasn't a clue how we were going to get there actually was emblematic of the importance of this, that people thought it was so important to make a commitment to do something, even though it looked impossible, and we certainly didn't have a clue how we were going to get there. Now we think we've got a clue. We're not sure yet, but we're certainly acting like we have a clue, and I'll tell you about that in a second. In November 2013, that was a point where the new president of the University of California, Janet Napolitano, convened the chancellors right before one of her first, it may have been her first regents meeting, I think maybe it was, and she got the chancellors to agree on a fixed date that was not as far out as 2050, and by that time, the UC campuses had different carbon neutral dates ranging from 2020 to 2050 still. So they were all over the map. They all agreed to 2025 for the whole system. And that changed everything, because suddenly that dawned on people that that's not that far away. I mean, that was at the end of 2013. So we had 11 years at that point to get there by 2025. That's the date. I won't talk as long as that about every slide. Don't worry. There are two system-level groups that are involved in this. One is the Sustainability Steering Committee, and this has carbon neutrality as part of it, but it really does spread across all the other areas of sustainability that the University of California has within its, what is now, this has 8 parts. There's now a 9th part in the UC policy structure. And so this just gives you an idea. I'm not going to go through all these, but you can see what they are. They range from food to waste reduction to transportation and so on. So I don't want you to think it's all about carbon neutrality, but the truth is, the amount of progress being made in all these other areas is pretty good across the UC system. Carbon neutrality is really tough, and it's going to be the toughest part of this whole picture. So this is a picture. Oh, it's in my briefcase. I was going to hold up a copy. This is the book, which is the framework that we're following. It is more of a framework than a plan. The thing you'd find interesting about this, I'll bet, is on the last page of this is a list of the committee members. I chaired the group that put this together, and one of the members of my committee was Steve Relier. He's now your system executive vice president, or vice chancellor, you call it. Yeah. So yeah, he's the chief operating officer and chief financial officer of your system. Very high level job. He was one of the authors of this. So Steve's all in. I can tell you that, and I know your president, or rather your chancellor. It's still confusing. He's Tim White. He's all in too. So I think we have a lot of common ground here that we can work on, and a lot of collaboration, therefore, that we can pursue. This framework has just 3 parts. It's actually pretty simple when you get right down to it. The first part is what we call deep energy efficiency. And by the time we put this together in, I think it was 2011, yeah. In 2011, we'd figured out by that point that 10% was way too low for what we could actually accomplish through energy efficiency. So we came up with this term, deep energy efficiency. By that, some of our leading people, Carl Blumstein, the head of the California Institute for Energy and the Environment, I think it's called, at Berkeley, and Michael Siminovich, the director of the California Lighting Technology Center at Davis, had started to use this term. And the first time I heard it, I thought they were over the top because they said, oh, that's an energy efficiency project that saves more than 50% of the energy. In other words, increases efficiency 50%. And I thought that was ridiculous because most of my career, I thought it was a really good energy efficiency retrofit project if it saved 20% instead of 10. 25 was really a top number. Well, these guys were saying 50 is the new standard. So I went back and told my staff, well, I know you got this list of projects you want to do. We're going to flip it. We're going to take all the projects that save 50%, they're going on the front burner. Every project that saves less than 50% is going to go on the back burner. We're going to do those last. I don't know what they said when I left the room. I'm sure this wasn't the first time I came in and raised the bar and then left the room. But this is turning out to be the most cost-effective, lowest risk, most certain way to take the biggest bite out of the carbon footprint so far. The second piece of this plan is to procure utility scale renewable energy. Now the reason for that is we studied two campuses where the sun does shine, UC Irvine and UC San Diego. We did that by adding up every rooftop, the top deck of every parking structure, every square foot of land that we thought wasn't going to be built on for the next 20 years, added it all up and said, what if we solarize the whole campus? So if you look down from the satellite onto the campus, it would look pretty much blue with solar silicon panels across the top of the campus. How much of the total yearly energy need do you think that would provide at, say, UC Irvine or UC San Diego? Any guesses? One guess is 40. Anybody else? Well, you're off by a factor of exactly 10. It was 4% in the case of San Diego and 5% in the case of UC Irvine. And the reason is you don't get solar all year. You know, you don't get it at night. You don't get it as much in the middle of the winter and so on. And actually, solar has a pretty low power density. You need a lot of surface area. And we were talking about painting the campus blue from the top, basically. And you get 4 or 5%. So we figured out right away, and Steve Relier was part of this discussion, we're going to have to get in the utility business. We're going to have to be able to procure very large scale renewable power, and not just solar, but other forms of renewable power off-site. For the campuses, it was kind of the same deal that California has. In California, most of the people live within 20 miles of the coast, and all the renewable power is 200 or 300 miles away in the mountain passes where the wind blows, or in the deserts where the sun shines, or in the geothermal fields where you can get geothermal. So we would have to become a utility, basically, in order to do this, because there'd be, if we just stuck, with, in our case, Irvine, with SCE, we would never get greener than they got. Now, the California grid is the greenest grid in the United States, among all the states, but maybe it'll get 50% carbon neutral. Well, we set our goals 100%, so we had to do something. Now, the third part of this, I'm actually not going to have any slides to show you on this, because in this case, we're going to have to invent the wheel. We don't have a business model yet. The idea is this. Just like this campus has a tri-generation plant, we have a combined cycle cogeneration plant at not just UC Irvine, but at 5 other sites in the University of California. They're actually pretty green, arguably, in that they produce quite a bit of output, energy output per unit of emissions, CO2. They are not paid for. Most of them are financed with 30-year bonds, and they're maybe 10 years into the bond issue, so we're not going to dump them. And they're highly integrated in, just like in this campus, a good example, highly integrated in with the entire energy infrastructure of the campus. So that means they're integrated with thermal energy distribution, with thermal storage, chilled water storage. You can't just, detach yourself from a cogeneration or trigeneration system. And the one here on this campus, by the way, is considered outstanding. It's one of the best. You'd be in the same boat. So but the Achilles heel, of course, is what's it burning? It's burning a fossil-based fuel. It's burning natural gas, even though it's doing it efficiently and doing it cleanly from the standpoint of NOx and SOx. It's a carbon-based fuel source. So, and by the way, of our fixed carbon footprint, meaning not counting what you probably know is called Scope 3 emissions, of the Scope 1 and 2 emissions in the University of California as a whole, 72% of Scope 1 and 2 is natural gas combustion, mostly for cogeneration. So we were stuck. I mean, we didn't know what to do. And so what we plan to do, and what this report proposes, is that we get into very large-scale biomethane production. And when we say get into that field, we hope we don't actually have to become the developers of it. We hope we'll find private sector, third-party deals, kind of like power purchase agreements that exist for solar and wind, but in this case, doing it for biogas. The first idea, by the way, that we had was find some places in California where you have a lot of animal or plant waste, such as near a rendering plant or near a cannery, or ideally halfway between a rendering plant and a cannery, or where you have these huge dairy operations. I had no idea how big a dairy operation was until we saw some that had 20,000 producing cows. And so the idea would be to use what was mentioned a few minutes ago, anaerobic, meaning without oxygen in a sealed container. The kind of anaerobic digestion that's being done primarily in Germany, in Europe. Germany has 6,000 anaerobic digesters. And what happened in Germany was, if you remember, I think it was about, was it 15 years ago or so, Russia cut off their natural gas supply in the middle of winter for about 6 weeks. Well, they didn't like that. And so they developed their own biomethane sources in Germany on a very widespread scale. So every municipality, every wastewater treatment plant, even individual dairies and farms in Germany have anaerobic biodigesters. So what we're talking about is doing it on a really big scale. And by the way, I always have to explain this to people who are actually not as savvy as this group, but I'll go into it. We're not talking about creating biomethane in places where it might be next to, say, a meat packing plant or a cheese factory or something like that, and putting it in a truck and shipping it to, let's say, UC San Diego. No, you stick it in the pipe as a biogas in Fresno or Bakersfield or wherever it may be, and then you take credit for it at San Diego and Irvine and UCLA and Berkeley and all the places where you need to combust it. So it's called directed biogas, which is a very strange term because the molecules, once they get in that pipe, don't actually have an address on them. You're just putting it in one place and taking credit for it in another. So again, I'm not going to say any more about biogas. We don't know exactly how we're going to do this because, as I say, there's no business model like there is for solar and wind and even geothermal renewable products. We're inventing the wheel in this case. And the initial plan here, by the way, was to do ag-based projects where we'd go, as I say, find a big dairy operation or meat packing operation or a cannery or some combination of those things. There's a big problem with that idea now, and you know what it is. It's that now there are questions in California about whether California is still going to be the state which is the primary dairy producing state if we continue to have this kind of drought condition. If that's actually climate change as opposed to just a few years, bad years, quite a few years now of drought, then it would be a bad place to put the $50 million which it costs per biodigester to do that in California. We'd never find an investor to do that, and we'd be stupid to do it ourselves. So the initial projects we're looking at are actually projects where in some states they still are flaring off the methane from their landfills. And these are mostly states where, frankly, they're states where they don't have as much money or the environmental regulations are not as demanding, or they don't have as many incentives for various reasons. We're looking in places like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, where we are going in, and where the university is likely to put up the capital to capture methane from a landfill that in most cases is being badly captured now, which means there's some methane leakage. Big problem, because you know that's so much more potent in terms of its damaging effect on greenhouse gases. And then process that gas. And when I say process it, that gas isn't pure methane that comes out of a landfill. It has a lot of, well, the smelly part of it is sulfur dioxide. And so you have to strip out any molecule that has sulfur in it, because that's bad for combustion for several reasons. It destroys combustion equipment. And also, SOx is sulfur, oxides of sulfur that go through the combustion process. So it's a very smog damaging kind of thing that you have to take out of gas. So kind of a long story about biogas, more to come. It's got to be a big part of the solution for us, though. And we're not quite sure, I'll be honest with you, we're not quite sure how much it's going to cost or exactly how we're going to get there. Already talked about this. Now this is actually, these next 3 slides, I'm not going to go through all these slides, but let me say, initially my reaction when I heard the term was, this is impossible, or it's kind of over the top. I thought the people who were telling me this were faculty. And I thought, well, you know, these guys aren't in operations, they're not practical, what are they talking about? Well, now these are actually slides of completed projects. These are not theoretical, these are all completed projects that save more than 50%. The ones that save the most, actually, are things like parking structure retrofit, lighting retrofits. We're saving 80%. 80%. 10 times as much as I thought would be feasible, you know, just 5 or 6 years ago. The second area in which we're seeing lots of things that save more than 50% are in the IT area. Actually, one thing on here, this is really interesting if any engineering students here, it turns out, one of my engineers pointed this out, if you just raise the data center temperature to a point where you're not doing latent cooling. Now, latent cooling is when you're cooling below the dew point, and the energy you're putting, the cooling energy you're putting into the air is actually dehumidifying the air. So that's called latent cooling. It doesn't, that part of cooling doesn't result in any temperature reduction. It just results in less, well, computers don't sense humidity. So if you just keep the temperature in a data center above the dew point, it saves 50%. Just that. That shows you how much energy has been wasted. And by the way, every time we turn around, we find that what have been considered best practices for decades, not years, decades, best practices have energy waste built right into the way things are engineered. For example, a room like this. This is a good example. This room, I don't know how many people would see it if it were full, but the way a mechanical engineer used to design a room like this would be, you count the number of seats, and you count the number of people you can get around the edges if you had an overflow crowd, and you multiply that times a certain number of cubic feet per minute that you'd need for all those people to breathe. Well, the room isn't full now. It doesn't need as much. So a smart room now is designed, first of all, to sense when nobody's in the room, it'll go completely off. And it'll sense now when a room's only partially filled, how much CO2 is in the room. And it will only bring in enough fresh air to keep the carbon dioxide level at a safe, and actually they keep it at a level, which, the reason I know this is at UC Irvine, we set the sensors a little too high at first, and faculty were complaining that people were falling asleep in their classes. And they swore it wasn't because the classes were boring. And so we went in there and we found out some of the sensors had a little bit of what's called drift, and they were up around 700 parts per million. Well, actually, believe it or not, just tuning those back to about 625 parts per million woke up people. But this is, my point about that is, you can make a building smart so it delivers just enough energy just at the right time, as opposed to taking the worst case, which is a completely full room on the hottest day in the year, and just blasting it and using the worst case all the time, whether it's full or empty, whether it's day or night, whether people are in it or not. So the third, and that's related to this third slide. In laboratories, I really have to control myself here because to talk about this takes half a day. We actually give a workshop in what we've done with laboratories. We have cut the energy use in our laboratories 61%. And we started out with laboratories, for the most part, that had already been beating California's Title 24 energy code by about 25%. And we did that before I even had heard of the Green Building Council. Green to me was some party, a political party in Northern Europe I didn't know much about. We did it because we had a budget deficit. So we'd already been beating code for about a decade and a half when we started this program, making our laboratories smart. And again, the simplest way to put this is it delivers just enough ventilation just at the right time. Not using the worst case analysis 168 hours a week, regardless of what's in the laboratory, how many people are in the laboratory, regardless of whether there's contaminants in the air or not. A smart laboratory senses all those things and makes constant adjustments. Every few minutes, actually. This is worth doing on this campus, by the way. I don't think you've done smart labs here, but you have enough laboratories on this campus that we know this would pay off for you. So how are we doing? Well, not as good as we hoped. I'm being honest with you. We did meet this as a system, this 2014 policy goal. This was an interim goal. We had this ultimate goal of attaining carbon neutrality by 2025. Goals at 2020, which is the same as the state of California goal. That would be to reach 1990 greenhouse gas emissions levels by 2020. And then we had this goal, which is self-imposed. It has nothing to do with AB 32 or any state policy. That was to get back to year 2000 greenhouse gas emissions levels by 2014. And the UC system did make that goal. But you can, and by the way, as you know, none of these goals is growth adjusted. This isn't per person or per square foot or per anything. These are absolute goals because ultimately you have to get to zero. So it makes no sense to adjust for patient days if you're a hospital or square feet if you're a campus or enrollment. So that makes it hard. There was growth in the period between 1990 and let's say 2020. So it affects this goal a lot. To get to 2020, from 1990 emissions levels is actually for the UC system a reduction of 50% because it's not growth adjusted and there was growth. So we've got to do something radical to change the slope. You can see it here. And this isn't quite to scale. I mean, obviously 10 years would be further out here. It'd be more like this. But you can see the point here. So some people, let me just say one thing about this. I admire Janet Napolitano's leadership in bringing the chancellors together, but some people call this her goal for the UC system to achieve carbon neutrality by 2025. Our system doesn't work that way, and I bet yours doesn't either, because some of your campuses joined the ACU, PCC, and others didn't. What this was, her leadership got the chancellors to agree, all of them, that they would make a commitment to this 2025 goal. That's a big deal. But it isn't as though she shoved it down people's throats or made the goal, because you know we have enough democratic processes, as you do within your system, that there's no way that a president would force a goal this difficult and this auspicious on anybody. But she did provide the leadership, and she continues to. So these are things that were announced practically the day after this goal was announced. Now, how could that happen the day after? Well, the reason it happened the day after was that report I showed you that Steve Relier himself had been involved in, that set the framework like a couple of years before. So we'd already been working on putting all these things in place. And in fact, the only reason it wasn't more visible was partly because President Napolitano wasn't in her role of leadership. The former president of the UC system, Mark Udoff, frankly, he had other priorities. And that's not to disparage his lack of profile in this area, but remember, your chancellor and our president inherited the worst budget situation ever seen by California in about the period of time that I'm saying. It looked like things went dormant. They didn't really go dormant because there was a lot happening, because This literally was announced practically the day after the announcement by President Napolitano. This is the Climate Leadership Council, which I co-chair. Again, this is the other major group at a large governance level in the UC system. These areas are all called pillars within this structure. Some of them deliver hard things, what I call hard things. In other words, energy services, that's a bunch of engineers and people that we've hired out of the utility industry, and their job is to deliver contracts for renewable energy and to try to develop a business model for biogas, which I was just talking about. Some of these are more or less what I call softer things, but very important: faculty engagement and student engagement. Now, the reason that's so important, well, the first reason is obvious. I mean, we're an educational institution, as you are. We want students to be engaged in this whole challenging endeavor. But the other thing is, it's going to get tough. As I said, the easy part is now. As we approach 2025, it's going to get so tough. I'm worried about faculty in particular saying, this is costing too much, it's too hard, we have other priorities. At that point in time, I want the faculty and student engagement to be so great, and student engagement is not as hard, frankly. I want it to be so great that there's no turning back. So there's a little sociology built into this too. It's not just about engineering and technical stuff. You have to think about the socio-political environment, and that's what some of this stuff is about here. This shows what's happened to energy efficiency for the system. This is about 6 years or so that it's really been significant. I mean, there were minuscule levels back here compared to what you see now. It's going to triple, I think. I was just in a meeting. I came from a meeting this morning at the system level where I was making the case for how much capital we're going to have to put into deep energy efficiency. I think for the UC system, it's going to be $900 million. We're in it about $300 million right now. And this has an enormous impact. I'll show you how much in just a minute. We've got sort of an idea of how far you can go with this. On-site renewable energy. Again, this is really important because all the renewable energy we can put in on-site is actually very cost-effective, and it doesn't have to come, if it's electricity, it doesn't have to come through the California grid. And those grid costs are going to go up pretty high because of the amount of energy storage that's going to have to go into the grid as more renewables get into the California grid. You've probably read about that. I won't really go into that, but I can if there are questions later. But and also because I said earlier, there's a limit to how much renewable energy you can actually develop on a campus. Primarily, it's solar for our campuses. And that limit, see, this is 2014. Right now, there's a huge expansion on all the campuses of solar energy. And the reason for that, some of you probably are into this right now, because the federal tax benefit for power purchase agreements, which is the business instrument we use for procuring solar, the federal tax benefit, the investment tax credit, actually goes from 30% to 20% at the end of 2016. And a system has to be completed by the end of 2016, so that means right now is a sweet spot if you want to get in there. Okay, I'm way over. Okay, we did this. You've read about our big solar thing. That's the first off-site project. Okay, let me just make this point. This is what happened to UC Irvine. And you can see what happened here for, this is about, what is that, about a dozen years or so. At this point here, this is what our energy would have been if we'd done nothing except just build a code and maintain our buildings. And these are things we did that actually started to cause a gap between these two curves. And so this is savings. That's about 10% right there after a dozen years or so. Look what happened. So what in the world happened right here that created what looks like a cliff? Well, the first thing was we signed the ACU PCC. That had a big motivating effect. The statewide energy partnership was expanded, radically expanded. And UC has had a better shot at that than CSU because we use borrowing to pay for projects, revenue bonds, and that apparently is prohibited by law for CSU unless there's a statutory change. So that's a big factor. We've had capital, and that's been a big deal. Oh, and by the way, look, this is what I want to show you. If you look at this and this, in about a year, we will have reduced energy per square foot 50%. I remember where I started. I said, we thought 10% was going to be a stretch in 2006. That's how far wrong we were. This is really a big opportunity for those who haven't gone down this path. And this, I had to throw the slide in. Our PR people love this. This is President Obama right down the road here at Angel Stadium at our commencement when he acknowledged in his remarks, those are his exact words, in the Better Buildings Challenge, because of that chart I just showed you, we were able to achieve the 2020 goal, which was to cut the entire campus energy intensity 20% by 2020. We did it 7 years early. So energy efficiency has a lot of potential. I can't say enough about that. But I'm out of time, and I'm happy to take questions when the time comes.
All right, well, thank you very much. That's inspiring for a variety of reasons. First of all, that the two biggest campuses in Orange County right here are working very hard towards energy efficiency and carbon neutrality and doing the right thing. We signed the President's Climate Commitment in Cal State Fullerton in 2011. Is that correct, Scott? Yeah, 2011. Been on board there with you as well. I've noticed a couple of themes so far. Cows, definitely, in both presentations, but also the idea of being good neighbors, good global citizens. And our next presenter, I think, is going to talk about the importance of that a little bit more. Our next presenter is Manuel Pastor. He's from the University of Southern California, another one of our Southern California neighbors. Dr. Pastor's research focuses on the economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities and the social movements seeking to change those realities. He holds an economics PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the USC Terpanjian Chair in Civil Society and Social Change. Dr. Pastor writes and speaks widely on demographic change, inequality, and community empowerment. He has also received the Liberty Hills Foundation Wally Marks Changemaker of the Year Award for Social Justice Research Partnerships. Please welcome Manuel Pastor.
I think you got to stand out here to get the mic to work. Glad to be with you, and I'm going to kind of try to move this fairly quickly because we're a little bit behind the pace. But what I do want to do is focus in on the sort of social aspect of sustainability that often doesn't get lifted up. And one way to think about that is to sort of realize how far we've come. When people, I live in LA, think about LA, certainly when they think about Orange County, what they imagine is car culture. We worship our cars, right? My first car was a 1957 Chevrolet. I worshiped that. Suburban sprawl, right? And also when people think about Los Angeles in particular, they think about race and class conflict. But here's what's fascinating about that. Los Angeles, I don't know how many of you actually make the trek up there these days, has changed dramatically. We are spending $40 to $50 billion of money we taxed ourselves for the expansion of mass transit. The hot neighborhoods are actually the compact development neighborhoods in downtown LA, Echo Park, Silver Lake, even in East LA, and there's tremendous interethnic collaboration and cooperation around social movement issues. And this is not just something that's happening in Los Angeles. If you look at what's happening with our central cities, there's sort of a movement back downtown. The sort of theory of compact development and more green development is actually taking place. There's tremendous policies in the state of California to try to promote sustainable growth, not just AB 32 and the greenhouse gas emissions, but the companion bills that have required the councils of governments to do metropolitan planning around sustainable community strategies. So if we're to think about where we're moving ahead in the future, we need to be thinking about the demographic changes that are occurring. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we're going to need to, and I'll suggest why, take equity, the idea of making sure that there are these benefits from addressing sustainability and addressing economic growth, that actually becomes center stage in the strategies that we use to go forward over time. One of the reasons why we need to do that, and it's complicated, is because if you think about the demographic change in the United States is going to become majority minority, majority people of color by around the year 2042, 2043. 10 years before that, the majority of the workforce will be people of color. I didn't say majority of entrants, the majority of the workforce. And by the end of this decade, the majority of people under the age of 18 will be people of color. So big demographic changes. What's interesting about those demographic changes is that when people see those demographic changes, in particular the growth of the sort of blue group there, Latinos, they tend to think that most of that's being driven by immigration. But that's no longer true. Immigration into the country has slowed down. It's basically flattened. Net migration from Mexico for the last 3 years has been 0. There's as many people returning to Mexico as coming into the United States, and that's likely to continue into the future because the fertility rates in Mexico have declined dramatically from about 5 children per woman 35, 40 years ago to 2.3 now. The fertility rate in the United States is 1.7. As those two come together, what's really driving growth and demographic change in the United States is the homegrown population, people born in this country, births. And you can see this by taking a look at the change in the youth population. In the last 10 years, the decline in the young whites has actually been 4.3 million nationwide. I always like to reassure people that does not mean that 4.3 million young white people died. We would have noticed that, right? What that means actually is there's more people moving into 19 and 20 than moving into 1 and 2. And so the youth population for whites declines. What has been the big growth population are Latinos and Asian Pacific Islanders in the country as a whole. And the interesting thing is that we've been through this. So if you look at the demographic change in the United States between the year 2000 and 2040, from about 69% non-Hispanic white to about 50% non-Hispanic white, that's basically the demographic change that California went through between 1980 and 2000. California is America fast forward. It's America fast forward in terms of demographic change. It's America fast forward in terms of the widening inequalities of income, which actually kind of occurred here before the rest of the country. And it's America fast forward in terms of addressing the issues of sustainability as well. Now, of course, one thing that's kind of a mistake is when sometimes people see that demographic change that happened. You can see big decline in the percent non-Hispanic white, big growth in the Latino population in California. They sort of imagine that demographic change is straight line, right? That it's going to continue to be exactly like it was, that by the year 2050, California will be 150% Latino, right? Like super Latinos walking the landscape, right? But essentially, really, that demographic change is slowing down. You can see it kind of coming, kind of coasting a little bit as we head into 2040 for California. So the demographic change is actually slowing down here too, stabilizing. And what's interesting too is that the demographic change is occurring geographically in places where kind of people don't think it's occurring. So this is what California looked like in 1980. One thing that's really interesting to note here is the counties of California. The only county that was majority people of color was Imperial County, the county on the border with Mexico. In fact, in 1980, Los Angeles was not yet majority people of color. And by the way, here's a great statistic you can, because demographic facts are really good for cocktail parties. Like if you use them, people will really like you. But Los Angeles in 1960 was the whitest major urban area in the United States, right? It's not how you characterize it now. But even as late as 1980, it hadn't made that transition. Here's what California looks like in 2010. And here's what California looks like in 2040. Two things arise from this. If you've got friends that were in some of these lighter areas and they don't have a taqueria near them now, tell them don't worry, one is coming. And the second is, what is up with Sierra, right? Like, it doesn't change at all, right? So anyway, demographic change, but what's interesting is people imagine it's all happening on the coast. It's actually now happening mostly in inland California. And you can see a little bit of that demographic change. This is a map where the lighter shades are greater percent white. This is in 1980. You can see a couple things about that. One is the coast of Los Angeles County, and the other is look at, behind the orange curtain, right? Orange County was pretty white, right? But this is what it looks like in 2010. And what drove that change? Well, interestingly, not African Americans. This is the percent non-Hispanic black in 1980. This is what it looks like in 2010. Interesting shrinkage of that population, a lot of movement out to the Inland Empire. This is the Latino population in 1980, mostly concentrated in and around downtown Los Angeles. This is the Latino population in 2010. Big demographic change in the San Gabriel Valley, also in the Fernando Valley, which many people don't realize. The Valley girl is now La Muchacha del Valle, right? Big changes, and of course in Orange County as well, and a huge spread of the Asian population. So I'm going to jump over this, and I wanted to, actually, let me say something about this, because I think this is actually the most important demographic fact. And it is the age structure of the different populations. The median age for non-Hispanic whites in the United States is 42. For California, it's 45. If you go down to Asians, blacks, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, the median age, half older, half younger, is decreasing. When you get the Latinos, the median age for Latinos is 27 compared to 42. That's 15 years. That's a generation gap. And it helps to explain our demographic change, because when you're 27, you're in prime family formation age. When you're 42, you think you're in prime family formation age, right? You may be. But it also helps explain some of our politics in the United States. That big racial generation gap, and we've got a report coming out about this next week. The state that's got the largest racial generation gap, the whitest old, the brownest young. Any guess which state that is? Arizona. Think about the politics in Arizona around immigration, ethnic studies in the school, and think about the fact that in Arizona, the K through 12 education spending, they had the third largest cuts in the last 5 years per student, and they had the largest cuts in public university spending per student. So this generation gap has a lot of consequences in education spending, and it actually has a lot of consequences in people seeing their fates tied together. The old sometimes don't see themselves in the young, and as a result, we get some political issues. Now, all of this is occurring against a backdrop of widening inequality in the United States. This is the blue line is the share of income going to the top 1%. You can see it's grown dramatically in recent years. People, when they see the tremendous inequality in the United States, say, well, we've got a lot of inequality, but at least people get ahead over time. This is a graph that shows you essentially class stickiness, which is if you're born in one income quintile, what's the likelihood you'll, by the time you're 45 years old, still be in the same income quintile? So if you're born poor, you stay poor, born rich, you stay rich. And charted against income inequality. Two things to note here: there's only 2 advanced capitalist countries that have less mobility than the United States. One is the United Kingdom, which has a queen, right? And the other is Italy, which has Silvio Berlusconi, who is their prime minister, which is kind of like having a queen, right? Um, so we're a very immobile society, and a very unequal society, just as our demography is changing. And I want to, for reasons of time and getting us back on time, talk a little bit about kind of some of the work we've been doing about this kind of issue of changing demography, changing income inequality, and loop it back to the environment in some important ways. You know, one of the first things that you learn in, how many of you taken economics? Okay, and I want to start with this because it's great. So one of the first things you learn in economics is, you know, demand and supply, right? And you learn something about the minimum wage, which is, according to everything you learned in economics, and by the way, they did a poll 30 years ago, and this is something 90% of economists agree on, which is that if you raise the minimum wage, what happens to unemployment? If you raise the minimum wage, the demand for labor, quantity demand of labor should do what? Go down, and unemployment should go up, right? So that's firmly held in economics, and there's no evidence. There's no evidence. In fact, in the mid-1990s, there was a report done called Myth and Measurement by David Card and Alan Krieger, saying, actually, they looked at California because it raised its minimum wage and employment went up. And then they looked at New Jersey versus Pennsylvania. New Jersey raised its minimum wage and its employment went up. And they said, well, why does that happen? Well, it turns out it's pretty simple. When you raise the minimum wage, who gets more money? Low-income people. What do? Spend it. That helps bump the economy up. Second, and this is one of my favorite stories, is my cousin who lived in Orange. His first job was at a gas station. This was back in the day when people actually pumped gas. And sometimes, one time, one person asked their boss, well, what do you pay them? And the boss said, well, I pay them the minimum wage and everything they can steal, right? Which was the case, because when you're paying people the minimum wage, right, there's not a lot of loyalty, there's a lot of absenteeism, they don't work very hard. When you raise the wage, people work harder, they spend more money, and so as a result, it turns out that the first thing we teach you in economics, and we continue to teach you, has almost no evidence for it. The other thing we teach you is that there's a big trade-off between income inequality and economic growth. That is, that more unequal societies, it might be distasteful, but at least they grow rapidly over time. That's the logic behind trickle down, right? If we're somehow, the rich had more money, they would spend more. By the way, just going back here, the period in which the rich were getting more money was the period of slowest economic growth in US history and led to the financial collapse. So that should clue you into the fact that that's wrong. But even if you didn't believe that, you might believe this radical set of economists at the International Monetary Fund that did a study looking at countries and their sustainability of their growth paths over time. And what they found out was that those countries that started from very unequal starting points did not grow sustainably over time. They wound up having lots of conflicts, political conflicts. They wound up underinvesting in their public education systems, etc. And the Federal Reserve did a study similarly looking at metropolitan regions, and they found out that those metropolitan regions characterized by a lot of inequality turned out, and a lot of racial segregation, turned out not to grow sustainably over time. And that's actually something we've been taking a look at in a new book, just came out a year and a half ago, called Just Growth, the title of this talk, in which we tried to take a look at those places where prosperity and inclusion come together, those places that have done a better job at sort of generating economic growth and economic equity. And it turns out that's a more sustainable way to grow over time. So there's an increasing sort of argument for people who are looking at economic growth that we need to be more equitable, we need to be more inclusive, we need to sort of shift away from racially segregated communities, we need to shift away from leaving people behind in order to generate economic growth. So what about the environment? Now, is there a kind of argument for this as well? So the first thing to note is that the environment like the economy, has a lot of unequal aspects to it. And I've been studying this for years. It kind of goes under the banner of this issue, environmental justice. And I remember when I first got my first big grant to work on environmental justice, I was very excited. So I went and told my aunt, my tia, Dalia, I said, Tia, just got a big grant to work at environmental justice. I'm so excited about this. And she said, ay, Manuelito, I'm so proud. What is environmental justice? And I said, well, that's the fact that hazards are disproportionately low income in minority communities. And she looked at me, still with a little bit of pride in her eye, but she said rather sadly, Manuelito, everyone knows that. So, you know, in fact, it's somewhat obvious. And if you think about where there's a lack of park space, a lack of fresh food, where there are more facilities and freeways, I mean, it is any wonder, just thinking about this anecdotally, that it's East Los Angeles that was cut up by 7 different freeways to be the interchange for Los Angeles. But this shows up very much as well in terms of even things like tree canopy. So if you think about global warming, for local folks, one thing that helps cool and make neighborhoods safe is tree canopy. But if you here, the tree canopy, which are the red bars, and then the impervious surface, which are the yellow bars, by whether or not the community is high percent people of color, as you move toward communities that are higher and higher percent people of color, more impervious surface, less tree canopy, more heat islands. So global warming affects everyone, but it affects communities of color even more because of this tree canopy issue. Same thing with pollution. This is a project we did called Justice in the Air, mapping states in the United States by how unequal their air is in terms of the risk from industrial air toxics. You'll be glad to know that California is not as bad as Colorado and Kentucky and Tennessee, but we're more on, you know, we're basically the same brand as Louisiana, which actually has a little place. I don't know how many of you know that in Louisiana, if you go from sort of New Orleans up, there's a place called Cancer Alley, which is where all the sort of refineries are, and it's a place that's about 80% African American. We're topping them in terms of environmental inequality, in terms of exposures. So what's interesting about this, and I think it really kind of plays out, there are some friends of mine who are at the University of Massachusetts Amherst who did a study. And it's a study, it's a great study. And I'm very infrequently jealous of other people's studies. I simply celebrate what they've done. And this one I celebrate, but I'm totally jealous of their title. Their title was, Is Environmental Justice Good for White Folks? And what they did was they tried to look at places that were more unequal in terms of environmental exposures, and they asked the question, if it's more unequal, do you just get more of it? That is, if you believe that all the hazards are in somebody else's neighborhood, do you just let more hazards accumulate? If you think you're protected from global warming because you've got tree canopy, do you stop working on global warming? And what they found out, and what this chart shows you, and it works in a multivariate regression setting as well, is that the places that had more disparity, which are the places as for each of these bars you shift to the right, certainly minorities were more affected, but if there was more unequal, whites were actually more affected too. That is, the average white exposure to toxics went up when they thought that essentially was happening in someone else's location. So these issues of equity are important because they're key to thinking about sustainability. We've just looked at a wide range of studies and published in the Annual Review of Public Health, and getting the same kind of message from what's called a meta-study, where you look at a wide array of studies. There's another reason why paying attention to these issues of equity are important as well, and it's the following. I don't know about you, but I mean, just let your mind roam for a second. When you think of an environmentalist, I mean, what do you imagine an environmentalist to look like? Kind of shoes. Birkenstocks, for sure, right? What do they have in the morning? Granola, right? What color are they, probably? Right? Beard? For sure, right? Got to, right? So that's what you'd imagine an environmentalist is, right? That's what people imagine. Here's what's interesting. That, by the way, this is, let me say it. For 10 years, the Public Policy Institute of California has been doing polls on the environment, and they found a pattern that I didn't believe. So I got involved with the USC LA Times, and we did an oversample on Latinos and Asians to see whether or not the pattern they were finding still held. And here's what's interesting. This is, do you worry about global warming? And there's whites on the left and Latinos in the middle and Asians. Here's the thing that's interesting. Latinos are more concerned about global warming than whites in California. More concerned about global warming than whites in California. Well, if they worried about air pollution, Latinos are far more concerned about air pollution than whites. When you ask them, are they concerned about soil and water contamination, far more concerned. Here's another thing that's interesting. We took the Latino sample, we broke it up between people who took the interview in Spanish and people who took the interview in English. You've got to imagine it's not 100% that those who took the interview in Spanish are more immigrant. Those who took the interview in English are probably more native born. Not 100%, but probably close. The Spanish interview takers, far more concerned about global warming. Immigrants. Immigrant Latinos, far more concerned about air pollution. You should shift your mind about who's an environmentalist from the white Birkenstock, spandex wearing, granola eating, to the person who lives near a facility, a refinery, understands what global warming is doing in terms of air pollution immediately, sees asthma in their household, and is dramatically concerned about these issues. And in fact, if you look at Prop 23, which was the proposition that was put on the ballot funded by 2 oil companies to reverse AB 32, the overwhelming vote that took that over African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, not white voters. So this is actually generating tremendous interest now in the environment, people who do environmentalist politics, because they've realized that the staunchest allies around global warming, and by the way, this is not a one-off poll. PPIC has found this in 10 years of polling. There's a group in Boston that found this about 3 years ago. They were so amazed and surprised, they called me. I said, yeah, I think it's true. They did it again, they found it again. So the allies, I mean, for those of you who are environmentalists, have brought concerns to include issues of equity and to changing demography. It's about building a broader coalition for change. Now, if you do that, we're going to have to be thinking about lots of issues, and I'm going to jump over all of these issues because I'm thinking about time. But I do want to just linger on this because, and then close, which is that this set of issues has found their way into the global warming debates in California. The current Speaker, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Kevin De Leon, is a guy who cut his teeth on immigrant rights organizing. His first action politically was against Proposition 187, organizing a march in downtown Los Angeles. He is now the president of the Senate, and he is one of the biggest fighters for climate change, addressing climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. He's just introduced an ambitious set of new targets for 2030 that are going to bring us down to the 1980 greenhouse gas emission levels. He actually also introduced 535. 535 is a Senate law which signed into being by the governor, but Senate Bill 535, which is taking 25% of the cap and trade funds and allocating them to the most disadvantaged communities, those that are environmentally overexposed and socially vulnerable, in order to address some disparities with regard to things like tree canopy, things like access to transit, but also because of the political reality that these are the communities that may be loyal constituencies moving forward. And the underlying map that is being used to do this is actually based on research that we contributed to, looking at those communities that are overexposed and socially vulnerable. So what do I think that this means for thinking about sustainability and the work that you do? And you're probably impressed because I'm closing this 5 minutes earlier than I was supposed to. Is I think that there's a tendency to think about equity and inclusion as sort of add-ons, right? You know, working on the environment is so important, that's what we need to do, and we'll worry about fairness later. Getting the economy growing is so important, that's what we need to do, and we'll worry about fairness later. You know, our friend Tim from Stone Brewing, aside from having the most interesting presentation because it was about beer, kind of really illustrated to us that sustainability is not a second concern, it's part of your economic concern as well. It's part of your branding, it's part of your image, and it's part of trying to save money as well. We're finding out from UC Irvine that sustainability, it's not a secondary concern either, it's a primary concern, and there's thoughts about how it is that the system as a whole can do this in a way that'll generate savings. But the same sorts of issues have to be there with regard to equity as well. It is not a secondary concern, it's a primary concern. It's one of our orienting concerns along with generating economic growth and economic sustainability. And I think understanding that the values of sustainability and inclusion align, that they're not in conflict. And I think the idea of thinking about who those voters are, who's really loyal on these issues, help to demonstrate it. Because I think, you know, we've in Los Angeles, if you start talking about investing in mass transit and getting people on rail, that's poor people and people of color are using the mass transit system. When we started doing Ciclavia to get people on bikes, there's been an interesting alliance formed. I don't know what you thought when you imagined bikers, but I imagine the same guy, right? Granola, spandex, etc., right? And believe me, those guys and women are out there doing the Ciclavia, but the other group that's out there that heavily uses bikes, immigrants, right? For a couple of different reasons. For a long time, they couldn't get driver's licenses, so they were using bikes to connect to things, and there's these interesting alliances coming together. So I think that moving forward, we do need to think about inclusive growth, we do need to think about the demographic change, and we need to think about how to put equity, inclusion, in the economy in all of the things that we do. And you can follow me if you're a Twitter fan on there. It's totally cool. I tweet in really cool and interesting ways. So thank you.
Well, this microphone's on right here. The idea was to have us all, the panelists all sit up there so we can eyeball them and ask questions and they can see our faces. But in the interests of our eardrums, I think we'll ask our open the floor to any questions that you might have for any of the panelists. I see one right back there. Professor Stanley, do you have a question? Shout it out, and then I'll repeat it, and then we'll pass it along to the panelists.
My concern is that green technologies that I've looked at are capital intensive. As we move to sustainability and try to use the AV bills and others for wind energy and motion sensors to reduce use of air or use of water, I heard literally that might, you don't have to hire an employee, you can put in a motion sensor. How can we find green technologies that can help state goals, green technologies that can provide jobs to people of color to help manage inequality also? The trucks coming out of the ports, Long Beach and Los Angeles, they're great. They're reducing our emissions on the 91, but I've heard stories of poor families not being able to sign the contracts for the cleaner trucks. Truck drivers who can't participate in this. And can people come up with green technologies that are win-win for reducing inequality? Any suggestions from any of our panelists?
What a pleasure to see you again. I thought I recognized you. Um, so, couple things that at least we're working on. So we've been working with UCLA, so you know that it's a tremendous activity for USC to work with UCLA, right? And on a project for something called the Los Angeles Business Council about rooftop solar in Los Angeles, and trying to think about solar installation, which actually, although the panels are made in China, there's significant jobs to be generated with regard to installation, and actually some with regard to rack design and rack assembly that is actually being done in Southern California, particularly by a company called PermaCity. And by building together the right coalitions, many of the workers they're using actually come from something called Homeboy Industries, which works with former gang members and is training them solar installation skills. And those people, after doing that, can go on to careers in general electrical contracting. Second thing we're working on is something that's actually really moving forward in an interesting way. It's called Jobs to Move America. And what it is that LA realized that we're spending $40 to $50 billion of our own money on rail because it's actually got federal money in it. They don't let you do local hiring. So there's been tremendous activity to see if we could do local hiring, not just on the construction, but actually also in the procurement of rail. Well, it helped. There was a lot of work done to try to think about how to bring railcar manufacturing into the United States. There's some of it that's done in Sacramento, but now there's a new plant that's coming into the Simi Valley area, and there's going to be other new stuff done. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to actually think about where the jobs are going to be, but it does require sort of future casting and actually, trying to think about how to generate those jobs in an important way. I had a third example I was going to use, but I'll leave it at that. I do think that we can transform this into something where there are potential wins. There's certainly going to be some trade-offs as well. A lot of what you're talking about is capital intensive, and we can't be delusional about everything being win-win, but I think there are some win-wins that are there that we can take advantage of.
Would you like to say something? Yes.
At UC Irvine, let's see, we've invested in deep energy efficiency now, about $75 million on the campus. And about half of that is equipment, meaning technology, capital items, and about the other half is labor. The laborers who I'm talking about are people like heating, ventilating, and air conditioning technicians, HVAC techs, building controls people, electricians, some plumbers. There is a problem looming, and the problem is that now that we have all these smart buildings and smart systems, it's a digital world. And so what we're doing there is we're partnering with Irvine Valley College to develop two curricula actually, and they're really taking the lead, but our role is, well, we help to stimulate this, I guess, by saying we would be an employer who would participate in an apprenticeship program, both at the entry level and at the mid-career level. I'm most worried about the mid-career people who don't have any digital skills, because they're going to be left behind mid-career if they don't. We have organized labor at the table. By the way, this campus is represented at the table planning this. So Orange County is in the lead, the two major institutions of higher education working with a very progressive community college. I think this really does focus on giving labor the kind of skills that they need. And I can tell you, organized labor is 100% behind this. So it's not just capital.
Another question?
I just had a question for Professor Pastor. When you're talking about demographics, and we all know people who are in mixed marriages, and so where does someone who's both Hispanic and white, father Hispanic, mother white, where do they fit in your graphs?
that's a great question. So for the most, well, the 2000 was the first year that the census included a multiracial category, and I think that what all of us expected was that that category would grow pretty rapidly over time, because we see a significant amount of intermarriage, and we also see young people essentially borrowing from each other's culture, right? You know, the fact that hip hop is, you know, incredibly popular in white suburban locations, right? That you've got, you know, Asian rappers coming out of the 626, right? Kind of a thing, right? The fact that when I know I'm back in Los Angeles when every African American barista can say Manuel the right way, right? So you know the way they've grown up. But what's been interesting is that that mixed race category, people marking it off, hasn't increased as rapidly as we thought. And I think there's two reasons why. They're kind of different. One is that for a lot of African Americans, the salient social characteristic is that they're black, even if they're mixed. So Barack Obama marked black in the last census because apparently the police in places like North Charleston don't check on whether you're biracial or not. So I think there's an aspect of that is part of the identity characteristic. The other thing I think that's gone on is that the identity kind of winds up encompassing multiple identities. So I think that even young people who may have an Anglo parent and a Latino parent will consider themselves Latino, in part because the Latino identity itself is something where it does not to romanticize it too much, but where people can have within their same family, people who are European, people who are indigenous, people who are African or black in their origins. And the story I always tell about this is the number of middle-aged African American women, older African American women, who are confused when I come up to them and say, "You look just like my mom," right? But they look just like my mom. So people's families are very mixed, and so I think that that's been a very fluid category. I think this is going to change as we move forward, but it didn't change the way we thought it was going to change yet.
This is for primarily the Stonyfield gent. I got here a little late, so I don't know all the names very well. But in case you guys also have some good information on it, I don't know. But I was hoping to develop some kind of business, and I'm thinking like a green thing to try to work with the city and stuff. And I heard that, you know, since you have all the feed and stuff that you sell to like the city at like a discount rate for the denitrification. And so you work with the city pretty well. How did you go about that allyship with the city? Like, how did you start that friendship with them so that it creates a productive and financially productive situation?
That's a good question. Stone issued a request for proposals and actually solicited several cities for installation of the new brewery. And unfortunately, this wasn't necessarily Stone's idea. Most of the work was done by the city of Richmond to develop that partnership from the technical side. So they were planning on it and developing it in order to use our high-strength waste for the denitrification at their wastewater treatment plant. But there were several cities that solicited us, and I wasn't in the room at the time for the other cities. I think Cincinnati was one of them. Baltimore was another, and I don't know if those other cities had similar type of arrangements for that partnering. I'm only aware of Richmond because we're having to design the facilities, et cetera, right at this point in time. So I don't know that I can give you much more of an answer than that.
Any other questions right now? Good, Alan.
I had a question for Wendell. I know that you said on the president's the UC plan that you wanted more faculty and student engagement, especially when it came to 2025. And I was wondering what could students do to have their voices heard that they want something sustainable to happen on campus? What can they do to work with faculty and staff to make sure their voice is heard, make sure it's heard to at least the administration?
I was very impressed with the way Greenpeace organized the student advocacy effort on the slide I first showed around 2006 when they went to the regents. I mean, this sounds kind of old-fashioned and even kind of corny, but politeness and respect paid off big. The students who would come to regents meetings, I was at many of those regents meetings, they would thank the regents for taking time to listen to them. They would treat them with respect rather than going in and slamming the table. And wow, did it work. I mean, the regents were willing to do anything to respond in an affirmative way to the kind of student concern, because what came across was the sincerity of the student appeal that was being made to the regents, and it was just amazing to see, because I can tell you, and I saw this over a period of 4, 5, 6 months, I guess, because it wasn't just one regents meeting, it was a number of regents. So I happened to be there for a number of those because we had some business item there, and I always made sure I was there to hear that part of the agenda. Greenpeace did a great job, but the students were really carrying the heavy water. You know, they were carrying it. So there's a lot to be said for civility when you're trying to influence a governing board like that. In the long haul, I think that the thing that students can do with faculty is to make sure this doesn't just become a topical one-time issue. That, you know, sustainability is about the long haul, and it's really more about the long haul for you than it is for me. You're going around during the time when the kinds of impacts that are being modeled and look so scary, and all the models which turn out to be actually on the low side so far. Every time we turn around, the rate of ocean acidification, sea temperature rise, loss of ice in Greenland and Antarctica, every single thing I can think of that was projected 20 years ago is ahead of schedule. So this is the long haul for you, and you have every right to demand, I think, that those who are entrusted with the educational process, especially in public institutions like UC Irvine and this one, you have every right to expect those people to be concerned about your long-term welfare when it concerns the planet.
We have time for one more question, and I'm going to exercise moderator prerogative and take it for myself. But I'm going to ask this question on behalf of all of the 20-somethings that are out here on our various campuses and so forth, and a little bit selfishly, because I've got some kids in that age, and I hope that they can get jobs and support me when I'm old and tired. What, in your perspective, do you think are opportunities for students that are interested in these questions and these issues, whether from a chemical engineering standpoint or a social justice standpoint or anything else? What are some of the thoughts and advice that you would have for somebody in this age bracket right now going forward? We'll start with you, Dr. Pastor, because I know you got to get on out of here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I've got to actually get on an airplane, which is not carbon neutral. So yeah. So I apologize, but I did drive a plug-in Prius here, so that got me part of the way, except I didn't find a plug while I was here. I'm kind of motivated by something you just said, and the question that you asked, which is, I talked a little bit about where you can head in the future, but I want to encourage you right now to dream a lot, to think big, and to realize that as important as it is for you to change your individual behavior to be more sustainable, it's important to go for structural change. Because unless we actually change this, the fact that we've got AB 32 has driven us to do so much, right? The fact that we have the SB 535 and it's going to put money into poor communities is creating so much opportunity. So think of this time in the university as a time to actually really dream big and really think hard about what the world should look like. And then as you enter into the world, there's going to be a variety of things that these guys will say more on sort of what, in some sense, technical careers might be. There is a huge opportunity for those of you who are interested in public policy. Economists who can figure out what's the most efficient way to do this, political scientists who know how to get the community engaged in civic participation so that there's buy-in, even as people are asking you to use less water or to have what seems like a more limited lifestyle. People who understand the sociology of change, right? All the people who do urban planning and are thinking, if we can redesign our buildings and get people out of cars, the GHG reductions that result from that are tremendous, right? And all of that is about getting people to think about the bus system and the rail system in a very different way, right? Begin to use those systems, be willing to not kind of have that suburban sprawl, I need to have my own yard sort of thing, but be thrilled at the idea of living in downtown Los Angeles, right, in a loft. Please buy one. So all of that's actually policy stuff, and it's not just science. And so as much as there's a role for science, I'm not saying one is more important than the other, and hope you guys will lift up what can happen on the business side or on the sciences side. For those of you who are interested in broad social justice issues, social policy issues, public policy issues, there is a role to play in this fight for sustainability.
Thank you very much, and drive and fly safely. We'll go to Tim next. Thank you.
So I'd echo what Manuel said. I worked at the Water Authority before I came to Stone, and I've only been at Stone for 8 months, but policy is changing significantly. The Water Authority was thinking about getting into the electricity business at the time, and policy is changing on the electricity supply side, on the grid. All of that stuff is happening now, and that is exactly true what he said. There's a lot of opportunity on the policy side, both in water, electricity, et cetera. And then for my own personal reasons, I'm a technical person. There's a lot of change out there for sustainability. Electricity's changing, water's changing. There's going to be new supplies all over the place. There's going to be tons of challenges for you moving into the future, and I hope you are able to meet those challenges. I'm hopefully optimistic that you can be, but we'll need the technical people to meet those challenges in the future, and I wish you luck. I hope you can do it.
This is going to old-fashioned answer, but the more time I've spent trying to solve problems in my corner of the world, and I do go to practically every event I can go to at UC Irvine, not just about technology, but I go to all the programs I can in the law school, for example. We have a new law school, which has a very strong environmental focus. One of the strongest in California is among law schools, which actually, oddly enough, California's law schools are not real strong in the environmental area. But we are. And so what I was going to say is, I haven't seen a simple problem yet. I see the need to get more education than just a bachelor's degree, whether it's in engineering or science or law or social sciences. The whole business of affecting the kind of structural change that Professor Pasteur talked about is really going to require a level of intelligence that goes beyond what I think is now available at the bachelor's level. So I really urge every student in here to think about becoming as prepared as you can be, because these problems are really, really tough. And whether it's economics or sociology or law or engineering, or civil engineering or environmental science, modeling, global climate modeling, atmospheric chemistry, the impacts on water systems, hydrology, the impacts on failing natural systems that are being affected by changing rainfall and pest patterns, or whether it's public health. I mean, I can rattle up practically everything we do requires advanced knowledge to deal with really incredibly complex problems that are coming out of global climate change. And so get more education, because you're going to need it. It's a really, really tough set of problems.
Get more education from a guy who said he read 100 reports as he was trying to figure out how to get things going on the president's climate commitment. We have two more important items for tonight. First of all, let's thank our panelists this evening. Thank you very much. I have one more thank you. This whole day was largely, well, completely governed by and run by, but also with the help of some volunteers. But the architect of it all is Tamara Wagner. Tamara, could you wave to everybody back there? Thank you very much. This has been a tremendous event. And there's going to be more next week with Earth Week as well. And I have the final item tonight is to announce the winner of the 3rd Annual Student Sustainability Contest. And so this is the 3rd time that we've done this, and it's been pretty exciting so far. We've had winners in the past years, and I thought I'd just recap those for you so you can get an idea of what's happened from these previous winners, and then I'll go into this year's challenge and talk about it. So last year, the winner, make sure I can read this with my glasses here. Last year, within the winner, 2 years ago, sorry, 2 years ago, the winner of the 1st annual winner was the project update for the EPA Rainworks Challenge. And so within that was what the winning award was. And within the last 2 years, our campus, Cal State Fullerton, has retrofitted over 7 selected areas for landscaping, replacing turf, water-dependent vegetation, and bioswales, and other drought-tolerant plants. So this was a student award, an idea that the student on campus came up with, that now our campus has implemented and is changing the way we do business here. So that was 2 years ago. Last year, the winner came up with a project that involved creating water refill stations on campus, or installing water refill stations on campus, so you didn't have everybody running around with a million plastic bottles that ended up getting dumped somewhere. And so within the last 12 months, the campus has installed 12 water filter stations in 6 different buildings on campus, and we predict that we've saved already 130,000 plastic bottles from going into landfill. So the winner of tonight's contest is going to have an impact on the campus. And as I think about the contest, let me read the challenge and then we'll get into the winners here. So the challenge for this year was to come up with and justify a sustainability project, program, or initiative for the CSUF campus. The goal of the student contest is to promote sustainability in student scholarly research and creative activities, encourage student advocacy, outreach, and involvement in campus sustainability practices, and make our campus more sustainable overall. The requirements for the project proposals needed to include research on feasibility, creativity, and sustainability elements. And so we received 5 really good proposals that sort of made it to that top final level. The ones that didn't quite make it to the runner-up and winner level here, because we're going to talk about 2 of them, they just weren't quite in the fully fleshed out stage, and I'm hoping that those are students that might have been juniors, and they're going to refine this thing and they're going to apply again next year because they had projects that were right there on the money. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the runner-up. Isn't the way they do Miss America? They start with the runner-up first. The runner-up this year was Asuka Nakamura. She's an undergraduate business administration student. I don't know if she's here tonight. Is she here? Yes? Is that you? Congratulations. You should come up and get a picture with Tamara. Yeah, come on up. While they're getting their photographs taken here, let me read you a little bit about Asuka's proposal. Go ahead and talk with Tamara and we'll get that. Stand there and smile for everybody. Nerve-wracking, isn't it? Congratulations. What's that? You do? Oh, maybe Tamara's just... So while they're conducting official business over there, Asuka's proposal seeks to address the pressing issues of the current state of drought for our region through a combined water recycling system, capturing rainwater and recycling gray water. This project suggests that the campus can address the recent water restrictions from the governor through infrastructural design for a more efficient use of available water sources. The combined water recycling system can bring increased awareness and engagement to the campus communities about ever-present reality that our water is precious. So, congratulations, thank you. And here's the hardest part about announcing the winner is I'm sure, unfortunately, mispronounce her name. Chelsea Waregwegi. Is she here? Chelsea? Yes? Come on over and tell me how to pronounce your name. So you can go ahead and say it in the microphone for everybody.
It's Chelsea Juregi.
Chelsea Juregi. All right, congratulations, Chelsea. Chelsea, not only did she win the project tonight, but also has artwork in our art display as well. So you can check that out. Congratulations on 2 accounts. Chelsea's submitted project entitled Time to Throw in the Towels calls for the campus to replace restroom paper towel dispensers with energy-efficient hand dryers. Chelsea's estimates of paper towel usage show dramatic cost savings both for the campus and the environment, projecting savings of over 37,000 paper sheets each day and tens of thousands of dollars in paper purchases and waste hauling costs. Her compelling concept for the Cal State Fullerton demonstrates initiative, thorough research technique, and creativity. So congratulations. All right, and I'll get pictures. You guys want to take the pictures? All right, thank you very much and congratulations. Well, I think we've had a pretty exciting evening. We've heard from some seasoned experts about where things are going in their various industries. We've encouraged and celebrated some young blossoming minds with ideas, and I think that's pretty much enough. Maybe we should go out and see if we can find some stone beer somewhere. Thank you all for coming tonight, and have safe travels home.